Okay, I think we're ready. Let's get our opening logo show. Welcome to Evolution Hour. Early on the morning of the 1st of September 2025 in our ongoing year of catechism and doom. And remember, TortuganWord.com has a whole slew of cute little PDF files that may be shared far to all folks everywhere in the universe. Okay, I think we got, we have our little chat on there, show on the stream. Okay, well, we'll see whether or not there's any comments here. Comment. See if that's showing up on my thing. There we go. Okay. Yeah, there was a little glitch up on Restream. It was a little bit bulky there for a bit, and I had to reload. Hopefully, we are running. As you well know, we are continuing with the exciting world of Titans, the creationists' creed from Sarfati and Tay, and they are on the soft tissue issue. And this one's a fun one because it's soft tissue bait and switch. They waive now a bunch of technical papers, fortunately, most all of which are available full text, that on, quote, record holders for soft tissue, unquote. Without our hi, Austin. Oh, how's it going? Well, hot here today, although we got some little tiny sprinkle of rain this evening, which will help the lawn a little bit. We're not as super heat mess or floods or any other areas of the country are. So knock wood, we're doing halfway decent on that. Other than that, we are busy with lots of different projects in which as well we have our material ongoing on material. In fact, some of the stuff's going to be we're going to be bringing up today regarding the hydroplate show is actually going to be popping up regards to asteroids, comets, and stuff in Rocks 2 Volume 2. So anyhow, what was interesting about this Sarfati and Tay crap is that they're not really being too specific about what these record holders for soft tissue involve exactly, and skipping the step of establishing that the molecules involved are ones that cannot persist in a YEC breaking timeline. So we start with the organic molecules, unquote, in Brox et al. 2003. There's a quite extended abstract of it's available that I'll be putting the link up to at Science Direct, which involved carbon chains in bitumen. So there was nothing about this stuff that was the kind of fragile material that couldn't possibly be preserved over very long periods of time. If they want to present something to suggest that carbon chain components that occur in bitumen could do that, let them go ahead. Just finished putting 15 or so polls on my page about creationism, anti-vax, flat earth, cognitive ability, and a bunch of interesting stuff. Yeah, of which we should point out that underlying all of those disparate topics, we've got the same Tortugan phenomenon, that you've got people who are could be very bright as all get out, but they're remarkably good at not thinking about things they don't want to think about and avoiding data fields and data selection issues and all of that. So we're going to be trying some stuff that we'll be seeing again, the example with this hydroplate matter. Anyway, the next paper is, quote, proteinaceous amide groups, unquote, in Allion et al. 2016. That one we will giving the whole paper on, which the paper explained were molecular fragments that were, quote, derived from protein compounds, unquote, seen in microfossils. So teeny tiny little fossils of which they've got derived compounds involved. Now, the quote right at their tail end, I thought rather revealing because it puts into perspective what's going on here. Oh, by the way, all of this stuff is being presented by them because it's in stuff that's really old, Precambrian and earlier, going back a couple billion years and that. So supposedly all of this stuff was way too impossible. The very fact that all the papers on this subject are not exactly going, oh my gosh, we're finding these little organic compounds. No, none of this is surprising, in the same sense that every time people are pumping up petroleum deposits, they are pumping up petroleum compounds, which have been around for millions of years in some cases. So The quote that I'm putting in the main material is: the present study thus illustrates that Precambrian cherts, having experienced relatively low-grade metamorphism, may contain, at least partially, chemically preserved remains of ancient life, as slight increases of temperature can strongly modify the molecular signatures of biogenic remains, documenting the carbon and nitrogen speciation of organic microfossils and estimating the temperature that they experience should be done in parallel. So, nothing wildly revolutionary about this material, although it's really neat to get further material on ancient life and what the biology of things were. So, read the bloody papers as well, because most all of these are full text, so you'll be able to run amok with it. Then there are the, quote, bacteriochlorophyll, still pink and biological pigments, unquote, from this Guinelli et al. Paper 2018. That one's in PNAS, so again, we'll get the full text to you. What they had actually found were, quote, intact porphyrins, the molecular fossils of chlorophylls, unquote. Some of these molecules can, in fact, act as pigments, but the paper wasn't really delving into that much, and it's not necessarily acting as pigments. And I wonder where the hell S&T got the still pink part. If anybody can spot it in the paper, I looked through carefully on it. I couldn't find any indication where they were talking about what color any of these things are, let alone that they were still, what, Pepto-Bismol pink, Barbie pink? I'm not entirely sure what. Then we've got a paper from 2019, Lauren et al., which is chitin in fungi. Ooh. Well, chitin is an extremely durable molecule. So is this a shocker? Certainly wasn't sounding shocking to the paper discussing the thing. It seemed matter of fact on it. Well, the interesting thing was that this was some material about these chitinous components that can figure in some fungi and not in others. So they were diagnosing some of these ancient fossils that are very vague and faint in terms of their chemical profiles to indicate that they were most likely fungi. So again, we're not talking about stuff like you could see little bits and pieces of stuff under a microscope. Yes. Hi, Vesta. And then the cholesteroids in Precambrian Dickinsonia from Bobrovsky et al. 2018. That's another one where they're finding steranes that occur commonly in nature, and they can find indications that Dickinsonia apparently could have had some of these things, which of course increases the probability that it's an animal form rather than some kind of strange manifestation of fungi or bacterial growth or something like that. We'll be discussing lots about Dickinsonia in volume 2 of the Rocks Were There, because we got a whole stuff on the whole bit of how you identify ancient stuff. Gunter Beckley's weird little evasions on a variety of taxa, and the whole bits about what was going on in development of multicellularity and then the development of the animal phyla. There's a lot of stuff that's going on there. And the work, frankly, it's fun to see how he was skating around the topic on that. Now, part 2 of our little enterprise relates to a thing that I saw quite a bit ago. Last month, a friend and I had seen, maybe it's even more than a month, into Stanford Truth's 4-hour important seminar on hydroplate theory with some fringe Walt Brownians, Brian Lauer, Pastor Kevin Lee, and Brian Nickel. And that's going to be a YouTube thing that I'll be putting the link up to. And both showed how prepared they were to repeat the undocumented claims of Walt Brown. And most of their discussion was not really talking about geology much, other than just some little brief allusions, but on asteroids and comet stuff, which we'll be getting to some of the little tweaks as to a measure of how their method's going. Lauer was particularly thrilled over Walt Brown's supposed predictions, and he went through a chunk of these things, which I was writing down a bunch of, that were not specifically documented. I'm assuming on Walt Brown's website. Hello, Purple. That I'm assuming on Walt Brown's website, he's going into more of this stuff, and he's got these charts listing off his various material. But I was only interested, frankly, in what SFT's bunch were presenting directly to the viewer to see how they would go about fact-checking all of this stuff. So one that really jumped out at me was a 2016 prediction from Brown that Planet X doesn't exist decades after it had become a dead letter. even though there's some suggestion that maybe Pluto-sized trans-Neptunian objects might turn up in future. But the point is, you can't be predicting the lack of support for a planet X decades after astronomers have pretty much given up on planet X. It's not a prediction. All he's doing is shuffling this material around. Now, whether or not Lauer or anybody else knew about all of this, yes, Purple, you can listen or just catch later on a review on that. That's what the whole bit is about. I was so intrigued by Lauer, who was just going on and on about various comets and the like. He was really impressed with there being rounded boulders on Comet 67P, which is a weird mischaracterization of the facts. Clearly, he wasn't bothering to cite any actual technical literature on it, so we'll be remedying that for you. There's a paper from 2015, a couple papers, 2015 and 2016 from El Mari, and 2017, 3 papers. And Payola et al. 2017, reflecting the actual astronomy observations from the Rosetta probe that had landed on this comet. At one point later, Lauer did some authority quoting from an 1897 paper by geologist Thomas Chamberlain, who I hadn't had in my reference field, so this was a great opportunity to add it, on scientific hypothesis, which frankly, it was considered such an important analysis about how you shouldn't let single theories dominate you. You should have a competing set of theories to be able to make judgments and all that. So it's a wonderful statement about scientific methodology. And Science reprinted it in 1965, and I'll be putting a link to that 65 reprint version up for you guys here. Anyway, Lauer was burbling how he, Chamberlain, had warned researchers shouldn't let one hypothesis dominate their thinking, which was horribly ironic, as if there's somebody that really lets a hypothesis dominate its thinking, is Lauer and the hydroplate bunch. For those of you who don't recognize that the current creationist model is catastrophic plate tectonics, which has the plates moving lickety-split. Hydroplates are kind of a different thing that Walt Brown is sticking with, and in fact, as I was surprised to find out, Lauer and Lee and others deny that plate movements occur at all currently in nature. So basically, they're saying that all of the geological record is flood and really nothing happening since then, which is a peculiar thing to deal with by these non-geologists, given the fact that we can physically measure plate movements, roughly the distance that your fingernails grow. Some of it can be a little bit faster, some of it a little shorter. So all of this stuff about that and subduction, this is current geology. And it's no coincidence that the hydroplate people can't even particularly persuade the CPT people in creationism, and neither one of them are persuading the people in the regular geological community, and just trying to burble that this is some sort of, they're blinded by their evolutionary uniformitarian dogma. Yeah, sorry. They know the data field and you guys don't. Anyhow, Chamberlain turned out to be a really interesting character that inadvertently is much more interesting than I think Lauer realized, because in 1899, just a couple years after that 1897 quote, Chamberlain had moved on to the idea that some people were just starting to put up, I think Arrhenius and others, that atmospheric CO2 levels were playing a part in how ice ages form, that when the ice level, when CO2 levels are dropping, that can cool things off, and CO2 levels rising, that can end an ice age. And so he was dead on target in suspecting that this was a major factor here. It's actually a very long monograph paper that was done, and the middle part of it, I'll be putting a link up to that'll be available full text. Lauer repeated a heck of a lot of tropes about mammoths not being cold adapted. No sources. This is still another one of the tropes that Walt Brown and some of the old Duane Gish, Henry Morris era creationists kind of push off with. Well, you do realize we have come forward in time on this, and we actually have mammoth DNA and some mammoth tissues that they can do biological analyses of. So here's some papers. There's Sean Smith et al. 2017 and John Stewart et al. From just 2025 that's going into the genetics of their adaptations of not only mammoths but other critters, and comparing mammoths with elephants and all that, to where they can look at in detail on this stuff. So this one is not washing much. And that would also indicate why the hydroplate groupies are not persuading anybody in the biological or paleontological or the genetic community either. And then in comes the other guy, Pastor Lee, and he started off with a little authority quote that piqued my curiosity as a historian. And it was a Kelvin quote from 1895 that, quote, heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Unquote. Normally, Kelvin comes up in creationist circles because of his pre-radioactive dating of the Earth and the Sun to like 40, 50, 60 million years, which is way smaller than what it actually is. And there's a whole bunch of reasons. In fact, we'll be alluding to the Kelvin episode in Volume 2 of Rocks. But so it was kind of a surprise to see Lee flip the tables, because normally they're relying on Kelvin, dear old Lord Kelvin, as a authority figure, where here Lee is trying to paint him as, see, this scientists can be wrong. They can be too wedded to their assumptions because, of course, obviously we know the flight can go on. Well, I've always been fascinated by a lot of these scientist pronouncements on things that can't be true. And what I had discovered years ago in researching a lot of these things is that some of them actually were made by the person claiming it and others weren't. And so I was immediately intrigued to find out whether or not this Kelvin quote was a real thing or not. Well, as far as anybody can find, no. Kelvin did have some commentary where he was very skeptical about the new dirigibles and stuff that Santos Dumont was experimenting with, and that's later than 1895. And I'll be putting a letter that he was writing on that subject in a website that'll put that in there. And there was a great deal of doubt about the feasibility of a lot of this stuff. But that particular one about heavier than air flying machines being intrinsically impossible, nobody can find any instance of where he said that. No one's documented. I can see no indication anywhere, not anything at the Wikipedia page. There's nothing from even some other skeptics or people who had heard of this quote were trying to track it down. They couldn't find anything either. So what this tells us about Lee is he got this quote from somewhere, and it never dawned on him that he might want to fact check to see if it was actually a thing or not. Do you think he might be doing that with some of his hydroplate crap? Let us discover. So Lee goes on about how comets are hydroplate ejecta. So he thinks that the hydroplates are squishing this stuff up, and it's throwing stuff up into space, and it's freezing and turning into comets and asteroids and crap. He's terribly impressed with there being organic elements in water in the comet Tempel 1, claiming that scientists were flummoxed by this and that only hydroplate theory could explain it. Well, gee whiz, this doesn't seem to be the view of the actual scientists. At any rate, of course, he's not giving any direct technical papers. Lee is also falsely claiming that no craters are found on these comets and the like, claiming that they're all just really loose bundles of rock pile, that they're not actually kind of semi-hard stuff in various. They can have a variety of crap floating around them. And because, of course, when the deep impact came along, it did throw up a bunch of dust. But not only have probes actually seen craters on these things, but the one formed from the deep impact event has been observed, where there wasn't a crater where it was, and then afterwards, after the dust is settled and pulled back, bingo bongo, there's the crater. And I'll be putting a paper on that from the science that will be covering that little pond. So he's really astonished that rock piles could come together in space, even though he was mentioning that gravity thing now and then. But Lee never got beyond just general videos and just repeating the tropes. Now, apparently, he pesters actual astronomers. He mentioned one that Christina Thomas, who's apparently lead on the DART double asteroid redirection test on reshaping Dimorphos during experimental impacts. That was the one they were trying to test out how we could change the orbit and that of potentially dangerous asteroids. And that's, of course, the context of it. So there's a quote on her being, quote, this was completely outside of the realm of physics as we understand it in our normal world. And that was just authority quoting from a Smithsonian post, which, if you read the whole thing, and I'll be putting a link up to it, it was about that impact method of disrupting asteroids. It wasn't implying that the physics of impacts or of asteroid formation or comet formations are inexplicable, only that our common everyday experiences of things are not at all what we're dealing with when we're talking about objects deep out into space that are being slammed into and trying to figure out what the orbital dynamics of them are over long periods of time, which is the issue of trying to deflect asteroids out in space. So it was clearly Lee either got this secondarily from somebody else and didn't think to check about it, whether it was originally in Walt Brown, which he's prone to these kind of authority quotes anyway, I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. I'm only interested in what Lee has to say about it. Then there's asteroid Ryugu, whose samples were crawling with earthly bacteria. And Lee is absolutely sure it's showing the hydroplate ejection from the Earth, rather than it being contamination of the little Japanese probe once it got back to Earth. And why not cite some technical work on the subject? Well, I'll do. There's a 2025 paper from Genge et al., which was out before Lee's talk. So theoretically, he could have accounted for it or tried to deal with it. But the real spectacle here related to the fact that Donny was hosting. And Matt Powell was hovering in the background, and that pops up as well. But I was interested in how he would be reacting to whether the heat issue would be coming up, because all this hydroplate stuff and impact events and all that makes a difference. Donny was really impressed with all of the important information that the creationists were telling him without any sources supplied. And so he was really happy as a clam. But he did, bless him, actually bring up the heat problem and allude specifically to Erica, who had dealt with this. And then he was sitting back and waiting for Lauer and Lee to dispose of the problem for him, which Donny seems to think they did because he was so impressed with it. Lauer, again, was denying that plate tectonics and subduction occurs at all. And my particular take home on Lee was that he was insisting that water was shooting up into space, dissipating the heat and becoming cold and staying cold as some of this icy crap is falling back to Earth, slamming through our atmosphere and flash freezing the mammoths. This is the sort of stuff that might have sounded plausible back in Henry Moore's era in the 1970s, but ain't going to cut it now. Needless to say, they would need to do technical descriptions of how much energy was involved and the modeling of details of stuff. Frankly, I think all of these people are way out of their league. I'll give the one little point is apparently, supposedly, these hydroplate groupies have been wanting to have a debate with the catastrophic plate tectonic defenders. I don't know, Steve Austin, whoever else is floating around out there, who's still pushing CPT over at ICR and all the rest. And apparently none of them are wanting to deal with these little characters, whether it's just because they regard Lee and company as so fringe and irrelevant that they're operating kind of at Kant-Hovind level or not. I don't know. But it is the case that hydroplate theory is functionally defunct in standard YEC circles, and you have a people, 3+ hangers-on, not including Brown, throwing Brown, you got 4, who are continuing to push this thing. And it's just precious. But if all of their analysis that they're trying to offer is at the same level of superficiality as what I'm seeing in this presentation, where they can't figure out how to cite direct technical papers, they're ripping around with authority quotes and confident assertions of things and flipping out what is, to some extent, completely contradictory explanations for the heat problem. One, that all of this stuff is being thrown somehow into space as if that's somehow able to get rid of the heat involved. Plus, the other approach, which I think Lauer was favoring, using the heat, Earth as a heat sink, which again, fine, claim that, but do the numbers and see if any of that works. And the fact that they're not even allowing for plate tectonics to be operating as a thing puts them way down the road good gravy. We're way past that. Let's move on, kids. Let me put my thank you note for people who have been helping out on the project here over these years. And again, I do this for that screwball thing, which I cannot figure out what the difficulty is with that word thing where it's oddly putting blue background where I had it and then lopping it off somewhere. I have no sense why it's the case. But anyway, the names are at least there. So the colleagues and researchers and assistant researchers and friends and legacy patrons who have come in, out, or stuck with me over the time that given how troubled our times are, I am very, very grateful for everybody that's still plunking some actual moolah down to support the old RJ. And if anybody can afford to do that, then please, by all means, let's we're wanting to stop our share. There we go. Okay. Then, as always, I stick links in the bits along with the links to all the books, fiction and nonfiction, so that anybody that wants to get any of those and read up on all this material, so that they will have their volume 1 of Rocks Were There to be the companion work to the other. It's all ready to go. Anyway, anybody have any little questions for me there? Otherwise, I will put my little advert up for Rocks Were There Volume 1 and take a slurp. Boop up in here. My den, so it's not exactly cool. That rain didn't help much at all. My little link going here. Blippity blop. And away we go. There we go. And because this is September, I'm born in September, and so I may or may not be going over to my niece's for our little birthday bash later on in the month. But presumably I will still be able to keep up with the programs each week as we plow along in there. Oh, and there was I'm going to put the notes up on there as well. I'll be posting it on Twitter and Blue Sky. That there's a new paper in PNAS on RNA forming peptides in water. That's an open access paper that I'm sure James Tour is going to be having a conniption fit over as the science continues to move on and figure things out, even though he has decreed from on high how completely waste of time all of this stuff is. And I'm sure there will be some comments on it one way up or down. From Erica or Dan Stern Cardinale or something. It'll be interesting to see what the reaction is on this stuff. The science continues to move on. I recommend everybody, if they need to dive into a technical field other than ones that they may be interested in on a specialized basis, like just as Erica is going to be paying very close attention to anthropology material at a way more deeper level than I would be doing. A geologist would be paying a geological material at that much greater depth. But hit Proceedings in the National Academy of Sciences and Science and Nature. Between three of them, Science, you can also directly access the Science Advances thing. The various open access stuff from Nature are a little bit trickier to get at, so I typically don't plow through the Nature Communications and stuff. I I include those into my data field when I encounter something that's relevant, which pops up fairly frequently. But anyway, those 3 resources that put new material in every week, you can do it conveniently on a weekend, which is what I tend to do, because PNAS updates on Tuesday, and Science and Nature are coming out like Thursday-ish. So if one does things on the weekend before PNAS adjusts on the next Tuesday, you can get caught up with a broad variety of material. And um, uh, PNAS some often, and for that matter, it's Science and Nature. Sometimes I'm genuinely surprised at some of the works that they put up as open access. So you can download those at your leisure and follow through on it. And then you can deal with, there'll also be the various commentary pieces that will be alluding to other technical literature in other areas. So in fact, the Science was alluding to this new paper in Nature. Yes, I guess Nature rather than PNAS. On the peptide formations that we'll see what happens with Tour and company. Anyway, everybody stay super duper safe. I'm not seeing any questions knocking around in there, so I won't bore everybody to tears for rattling on the inevitable politics and stuff that we're getting at. Still wait and see what happens as more bad impact of the tariffs and other things screw up the economy, and watching the nincompoopery and venality of ICE and all the rest of this stuff going on. It's sad. And then I'm trying to keep an eye on how much is going on in the rest of the world to see to what extent can our gum-ups here not drag other nations down with us. And if we can avoid that kind of a thing, we may be able to avoid a kind of global catastrophe like we had in the 1930s and 40s. So that's what we'll see. We'll find out where all that is. So everybody stay super duper safe, and keep an eye out for the wooden penguins, especially ones wearing goggles and with lasers. They know they're after you. And we will see